This is part 8, Imago and the World of Words. It never occurs to most of us to think about thinking itself, much less how underappreciated the power of thought is. We take this ability for granted. Most never learn what it means to have their mind work for them instead of against them. We don't really take the time to think about the processes that are happening underneath our thoughts. So to many, the idea of being taught exactly how to think may seem preposterous or even insulting. However, even quite a few academics of high esteem remain completely oblivious to this notion. After all, most academic institutions in the world teach what to think, not how to think. Most thinking consists of the conjuring of images or concepts that are given to you by your culture, right? They're created by other people. And then these are associated with words and ideas that we learn about, either by secondhand information or by experience. But learning is not being told, of course. The best learning, of course, we all know comes through experience. But all too often, this classroom style of learning, being told something, passes for learning in most schools. Which particular thoughts come to us are typically planted by the seeds of our culture, right? There has to be some kind of starting point for all of this. Our mental processes, in a real sense, are not our own. They're created by our culture. We do not generate our thoughts completely in a completely independent way, okay? Nor is our personal identity truly unique or separate from anyone else in the objective sense, right? That's a very slippery notion to think of yourself as a unique person, to think of your identity as exclusively yours. In a subjective sense, it is, but in the larger objective sense, it is not. Who you think you are is completely an illusion. In comparison to direct experience, thinking, as we talked about in a previous part of this series, thinking is roughly third-hand information. Cognition or thinking occurs post facto or after the fact to the primary experience itself, right? That's most typically what happens. Something happens, and then we're allowed to think about it. Then we can think about it. Then we can process it, right? You know, when something happens, and you hear this so often, and we've all experienced this. You know, so it just happened so fast. It just happened so fast, right? This happening so fast is it's an admission that we've not gone completely into the moment, that we're trying to bring something that we already know, our cultural language, the way that we see the world is through these concepts and ideas that we fill ourselves with, and then we bring to these experiences, right? The paradox of language and thought is that it requires a certain level of cultural conditioning in order for the seeker to attempt to break this at a later point, right? So we do need this. I'm not saying, of course, that language or thought or culture are things that are negative, but we need those things, and they're very important. And at some point, we need to graduate from them. We need to graduate out from this. We'll never leave it completely, obviously. We're transcending what came before, this language, thought, and the ways of our culture. We're transcending it, but we're also including it, right? Thinking comes with all sorts of cultural baggage, in a sense, right? It gets us to the dance, and we can take it so far, and then if we are to continue in our studies, continue in our seeking, in our esoteric studies, then we must see outside of it and appreciate it in a different perspective, in a different way. This is there's a few quotes here from Alan Watts. We seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own, for we think in terms of languages and images which we did not invent, which were given to us by society, right? Our culture and our society gives us this way of thinking, these concepts, and this worldview. Another quote from Alan Watts: when a man no longer confuses himself with the definition of himself that others have given him, he is at once universal and unique. If there's any teacher to learn the difference between the true self and the self that is manufactured on the assembly line of culture, which of course most people falsely believe is uniquely themselves, this teacher that I learned this idea from, where it at least planted the seed, would be Alan Wilson Watts. This idea that this concept of you, and you go about your daily life and you think of yourself a certain way, and this is who I am, and I'm different from this person, and this is what makes me tick, and all of those things, right? Once you reach a certain level of seeking in your esoteric studies, you realize that that is an illusion, right? It's a false idol in your mind. It's an Imago. Fortunately for us, Alan has a lot of audio out there. He gave a lot of talks, and there are probably over 100 hours of his audio lectures freely available on YouTube or archive.org. If you haven't checked out archive.org, there is quite a lot to find on there. It's an amazing resource. Audio, video, books, lots of it's all public domain for the most part. So to the uninitiated, Alan Watts, if you've listened to him for any length of time, chances are he may seem to communicate in a paradoxical way. And initially, to me, it did sound like some kind of Eastern mumbo-jumbo. I couldn't make any sense of it. For many years, this is how Alan Watts came off to me, right? But I knew there was something to what he was saying because I could feel. I couldn't intellectualize why, at least initially. I could not intellectualize why. I couldn't intellectually parse the value of what he was saying, but I could feel that he knew something that I didn't. It took a long time for me to understand, but when I finally started to get it, my perspective on life changed radically. Alan Watts moves a step beyond thinking, however, into the primary reality or direct experience by encouraging participation in age-old methods by which one may completely get out of the realm of thought and immerse themselves into the direct experience of what is the primary isness of all things, the primary reality, and take you out of your mind, out of this cultural conditioning, out of this realm of language and thought, right? Out of this notion that you are an individual, and there is the world, and there is you, right? In a subjective sense, this is true, but in a big picture, objective sense, this is an illusion, completely. So the true self, where the little you exists, or I should say, you should be able to get out of your mind and experience what is, and this takes you out of your mind and into your true self. So the true self is where the little you ceases to exist and the big you is discovered, right? There's this you that you think you are as an individual, which you are, and it's necessary to think this way in order to navigate in the world, in order to survive, right? This is very much needed. But then there's a big you, which is not unique. It is not anything that has nothing to do with you. At the same time, it is you, right? There is there's a audio series put out by Alan Watts called Out of Your Mind. And it's quite good. I would say give it about 30 or 40 or 50 listens over months and years. And let it sink in, right? Maybe it might have, I think it took me a lot longer, but everyone goes at their own, everyone has their own. Things come to you in a different way for everyone, right? So this primary direct experiencing is a process of constant transformation where the experience and the experiencer become one. There is no distinction between you and the experience. The cultural conditioning dissolves away completely when you're in this state. All that is left is the experience or raw isness of reality, okay? I know a lot of what I have to say is, first of all, it's only for the seeker. And for a lot of folks, it may sound paradoxical, just like what Alan Watts talks about. A lot of Eastern mysticism, a lot of occult teachings sound like one big bunch of mumbo jumbo. Sounds like just a paradox, right? It's something that you work up to, and at some point, with enough exposure, with enough practice, with enough contemplation and dedication, and it really doesn't take a lot. It might take you a long time, but a little bit each day, a little bit each week, and before you know it, your perspective is at a much higher level, and you're graduating slowly until you reach higher and higher levels of awareness. And Alan Watts is a great way to do this for yourself. So this will be the focus of the rest of the section, is not thinking about these concepts, but instead unthinking, unwinding some of this conditioning, right? Of course, we can only start, for me and for many others. Some were born into an enlightened state. Some, but many of us were not. Many of us we had to arrive at a state of unthinking through thinking, right? We had to find a book and start thinking about it. And then the messages in the book, or the messages in the teachings, whoever your teacher is, or the talks given by Alan Watts, or whatever your teaching is, that's by the use of words and language that slowly shows you by example after example, story after story. It just goes on and on and on, and you don't get it, but you got to keep going. Eventually you will. But eventually through thought, through language, through your cultural conditioning, through the stories, through the parables, eventually you have a break, right? Not a mental breakdown, but you have a shifting happening where you were brought from the use of words and language, and that led you to let go of some of this conditioning, right? It's very hard to do in that direction. It's very difficult to go in that direction. If you go in the other direction, if someone just grabs your hand and pulls you into a direct experience, right? And you can immerse yourself directly into an experience. That's actually a much quicker way, right? That's why if you want to, that's why meditation is so helpful. That's why being involved in any spiritual practice will actually get you there quicker. Now, there's both, of course, both the way of using the mind and your cultural conditioning and your language to think these things through, and then also to go into direct experience would be preferable. But of course, in this video series, I can only use language, right? I can demonstrate some of these spiritual practices. I can talk about some of these. I can show you. I can recommend some of these, but you've got to do them yourself. You have to find what works for you, right? So the rest of the section is going to be about unthinking, or getting out of this mind. Of course, I'm using language to do that, but there are practices that we'll mention along the way. There are certain things that you can start investigating for yourself, right? So this unthinking is, another way of saying this is to directly experience something and open oneself into actual being and becoming. So do you remember what I said about the raft at the beginning of this presentation? If you watch the first part, and you take a raft across a river, right? This is a parable for using thinking and unthinking. So if you use a raft to cross a river, right, and then you want to keep walking into the forest and continue on your journey, are you going to pick up the raft and carry it with you, right? Are you going to bring what you no longer need with you, right? So if you're bringing something you don't need with you, that's another way of saying you're bringing your preconceived notions, what your culture has conditioned you, how they've conditioned you to think, your language, your thought. You're bringing it into an experience and thinking about it and judging it and doing all of these things. But you have to let go of it to really fully immerse into the experience, right? And once you can do that, then you start to make realizations, and they make connections with your conscious mind, and you make these realizations that, wow, this way of unthinking, right, opens up a completely new perspective, and that's when the learning really starts. It's when you can unlearn. It sounds like a paradox, and it is, because that's our reality, right? So by going out of your mind at least once a day is tremendously important, because by going out of your mind is to come to your senses. So in the movie Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee teaches his student the difference between feeling into and becoming the experience versus thinking about the experience. If you watch Bruce Lee movies, study Bruce Lee. If you haven't seen Enter the Dragon, by the way, amazing movie. Kind of dated, but the philosophy that Bruce Lee brought, his way of understanding martial arts, is a very esoteric perspective, right? He's becoming the experience. He is the experience, right? So Bruce Lee tells his student, he's trying to teach him how to go into the experience and how to be, right? How to really go into the martial art. And so he tells him, it is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger. So this is to say, thought, ideas, images, or symbols only exist in the mind. An image, or an imago, with all of its associations, emotions, and mental chatter, underlie the magical process from which you interpret your world and derive all meaning. One benefits greatly from a daily practice of getting rid of this conditioning, right? There's certain words, there's quite a few words in our language that you can use that invoke a response out of people. There's certain words that you can say, many different words, that will bring you into a certain state. They'll change you emotionally. Right? This is conditioning. And you need to learn how to escape this. And this is what Bruce Lee essentially is teaching to his student through, in this aspect, it's through martial arts. But you can learn this, practice this in many different aspects of your life, including releasing this cultural conditioning and releasing this sense that you believe is real, that you are an individual and that you are this and this person and this is what you're about and this is who you are and this is what distinguishes you from the rest of the world. You have to learn to let go of that if you want to go deeper into your own practice. And again, it's a paradox, right? But it's this middle way. It's this middle path. On each side, you have each extreme of the paradox, and then here you are coming down the middle. You're equally just the same as everyone else, as you are unique. So that glowing round object you sometimes see in the night sky is not the moon. That's what I'm saying. It existed long before there was a name for it, right? And then we came along and the moon, right? It's not really the moon. So direct experience is primary and thought is secondary. So Bruce Lee is really teaching a student, if you're thinking about your technique, if you're thinking about your martial arts technique, then you're a bystander to the experience, right? You need to go into the direct experience. Forget about thinking about it. Just go into it, right? You have to think about it initially. You have to learn what the teacher is teaching you. You have to learn the specific way to kick, right? The specific way to throw a punch. And then you have to go into the experience. So magic, or the transformative process, underlies all of these things, right? This direct experience, and of course this secondary experience through thought, right? This is an interesting quote, and where I go in my research for these presentations can lead me anywhere. And I saw this quote, and I just thought, wow, this is such a good example. I never forget a face, but in your case, I'll be glad to make an exception. I don't think anyone under the age of probably 40 or 30 years old has the foggiest clue who Groucho Marx was. A prime example, this is still a great quote though, a prime example of the secondary nature of language is the experience of forgetting someone's name. Have you ever experienced that? And we all have. You know in your entire body when you recognize someone from seeing them before, though, right? Which this remembering, this comes out of your body somewhere, right? This remembering occurred in the primary, this is something that occurred in the primary experience of reality, even though you forgot their name. So at some point you encounter someone, you meet someone, you shake hands or you say hello or whatever. They tell you your name. Oh, yes, nice to meet you. You get an energy exchange. Some energy exchange happens, and there's some part of their energy that's with you, right? And then the next time you see this person, you recognize, you feel that same energy. There's that person again. I remember them. I know that face. I exchange energy with that person. I don't know their name. I have no idea. Right? That's an example of the primary world and the world of thought. The world of thought is the secondary world trying to remember their name. Right? Because their name doesn't really exist in objective reality, but the energy exchange that happened does exist in primary reality. Right? What you're trying to draw from is a secondary reality to match the name with the energy exchange or the person, right? So why does this happen? It's because human language and thought came into being long after the visual nature of primary sense experience, right? Human evolution has had a much longer time perfecting the survival skill of visual scanning of the environment, of having that energy exchange, right? What does something feel like? What does it taste like? What do they look like? What does someone smell like? I mean, what do they sound like, right? Your skill of tuning into the prelingual world. When I say prelingual, I mean the primary existence of the world, not the virtual world of language, but the real world. It's far more advanced than you realize. It has existed far longer and has had much more time to evolve than thought has, right? Thought is kind of new. Spoken language is a mere blip on the radar screen of human history in comparison to the foundational forces hidden within you. So this unthinking, this unlearning is a way to unlock forces within you that are much more powerful, that will lead you as the seeker, as a student of occult study. They'll lead you to places that will eventually bring you back to a place of language, a place of thinking where you can bring some of these direct experiences that you've had and begin to use language to relay those experiences. You can't relay the full experience, but you can begin to show a different energy and to bring something into the world. And there's so much power in that, right? There's a lot of, if you're speaking from that place of direct experience, okay, that gives you so much more power than if you're speaking as if you were like some sort of a parrot, or you're just repeating what you've heard before. And that repeating of what you heard before it's not really a genuine energy, right? It's like second, third, fourth, fifth hand kind of stuff, right? But you need to speak from that direct energy. But you need to tune into that, right? You need to unlearn all of the conditioning that teaches you how to blah, 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 blah. You're just repeating, you're just stringing together a bunch of things that you've heard throughout your life, right? But if you go into that direct energy, then something different comes out of you, something genuine, and at the same time, something unique, genuine, but at the same time, something universal. So we're back to that paradox, right? So this is a statue of Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. His teachings were the foundation upon which the religion Taoism or Taoism were built upon. His most well-known teachings were condensed in writing and presented as the Tao Te Ching, the scripture of Tao. Lao Tzu was attributed as saying, "Those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know." There's a similar saying in Judaism: "He who says doesn't know, he who knows doesn't say," right? This is a foundational, this is an axiomatic teaching of occult study or esoteric study. It is not possible to fully convey such a teaching in words, first of all, right? Since language is not primary to reality. However, maybe something I say during this presentation will strike your unconscious being in a particular way, and you'll go, I always felt that, but I never had words for it. I never really thought about it that way, right? This may result in your own path of discovery. You may stop this video right now and go, you know what? I got to go do this. I've got to go learn about this right now. I'm going to go pick up Lao Tzu's book, or I'm going to listen to Alan Watts, or whatever it is. Great. That's where you need to be, right? Higher levels of awareness can come to any of us from different starting points. Doesn't really matter. So there's no any spiritual teacher can give you a kind of okay, start here, now go here, now go here, now go here. And many of those systems work to a point, but then you have to go and understand on your own, right? You have to go into your own. You can't just be told a bunch of things and, that's like just what a parrot does, right? There's many different systems. You can very much find your own system and reach the same level of awareness as some of the greatest educated Zen Buddhist monks or any of the great yogis or any of the great spiritual teachers, right? You can do this on your own, completely in your own way. Will you create a system of it? Will you create this school or this religion or this temple? Well, maybe not, but you're on equal footing regardless, right? But it has to speak to you. So these are different starting points for everyone. There's no one way to do this. And if any spiritual teacher tries to tell you there's one way to do this, then they're full of shit and it's time to move on, right? So for the seeker, as most of us here are, this arrival at understanding is purely for oneself and at the very same time universal for everyone and all things. So of course, I think there's great value in finding works such as the Tao Te Ching, finding some of the great teachings of antiquity, and finding great teachers that are still alive and learning from them. But at some point, you've got to take the training wheels off.